think we're going to go ahead and get started. Welcome to the AIA Home Store. We thank you all for attending. This is the webinar for the Windsor Road Farm by Hugh, Jefferson, Randolph Architects. They are a local firm, 7-person, very design focused, and they've got a great project for us to see. We have got a 2-part presentation here. One is going to be a little slideshow with some media for you guys to see with a voiceover. Hugh will be running us through that. And then we will have a video after that, a little tour, walk through the house to talk about a few moments that are of interest. And then we'll have a short Q&A at the end. So yeah, we're gonna go ahead and get started.
Well, good morning, everybody, and glad you guys could join us. So I guess there's a lot of ways that in thinking about this webinar and virtual tour, someone had said, what's interesting is, there's so many stories and the character of our project, the Windsor Farm. And I really think that there's always talk about architecture. It could be, the structure, it could be the technology, it could be sustainability, almost infinite number of ways that you could present something. But for me, the most interesting thing is, in particular about this project, but in architecture in general, is really how it has the ability to tell a story. And the story can be about the building, but I think also about the people, and especially in older houses, it's the story of, the activities that happen there, the families that live there, and how their story begins to affect what you see in the architecture itself. And so really it's the layers of history is how we're going to be talking about this house today. So meet Viola Emmert. Viola Emmert, who later was Viola Roberts, and she had was born a daughter of German immigrants, grew up in Hyde Park. Very spirited, very adventurous woman. Love the outdoors. Here she is at Barton Springs Pool. So over the years, later, she met John Roberts. So she and John both had a very independent streak, adventurers. And so here they are in front of their house in Hyde Park, and they love to horseback ride. And one day, at least the story goes, is they were riding on their horses from Hyde Park towards Lake Austin through the newly developing neighborhood of Tarrytown. And there they saw, kind of hard to believe nowadays, but they saw a gentleman who is set up on a booth on the side of the road selling lots for sale. And so they picked one, beautiful hilltop lot underneath 2 live oak trees, and that's where they decided to build their house. So, really what next? You find a piece of land, and even back in the day, what's the next step to build a house? So when building a house, should you hire an architect? Yeah, well, of course I'm biased. But who do they pick? So, back, I don't think Frank Lloyd Wright or Corbusier, I don't think they were available. And the guy on the right, I don't think he really ever was an architect in real life. So, but who did they pick? Page, Sutherland and Page, established firm. They believe like the early 1900s is when they began. And you may know their name. They're simply Page nowadays. And I find it interesting to, have the house kind of tied, not only the people who live here, but also within the architecture community, to have to be the firm, which is still, everyone recognizes these buildings, convention center, airport, the Del Med School. In fact, it's not only just in Austin, they're now all over the country. So just one more kind of layer of history. So back to the Roberts, what kind of house would they build? I'd like to think that, both of them being so independent, adventurous, that they want something that is not pretentious. I can't see them being in a colonial or federal style revival, sort of a house. So what did they pick? Well, I don't know whether they came to the, Lewis Page, with the directive of having, a ranch style home, but that's what they did. So a California ranch was really the style. And the California ranch is something which, unlike the mid-century, when people think of ranch houses nowadays, I think most people think of kind of more the mid-century modern ranch, but a lot of the same characteristics. And the California ranch being in the 1930s predated it. But typically one story, shallow roof, exposed rafter tails, the vertical board and batten trim and so forth. But again, those are all particulars of how the style is developed. But I think most importantly about it is that it's a very unpretentious, casual, type of house. And it really reflected a shift in culture, from being, more formal to kind of just a more, casual way of life, and so forth. And so that was reflected in the architecture. I can't really imagine back, prior to that, in the Victorian era, someone wanting a house that looked more like it was influenced by a agricultural rural building. So here is, we very fortunate, my wife was able to find these drawings at the Austin History Center. And you can see here from May 10th, 1939, Page and Sutherland architects at the time. And so there's different elements that you see, but again, it's a combination of the rafter tails. It's part painted brick and part vertical board and batten. And then little details, like you can see the chevron pattern, the paneling of the gable end. And then there's a small birdhouse, which I really like, and which later, with a little weather vane on top, which later influenced a portion of our change. There you see the detail through it. And so it's a ranch, but they have these little decorative touches, which I really love. So the Roberts built the house. The site plan, as you can see, it's on a corner, but it's not a square, it's not a rectangle. And so one portion of the home is parallel to Windsor, and the other portion is to the side street, which kind of creates a really casual shape. But so over the years, the Roberts did live there. And then in the early 60s, Mr. Roberts passed away, and Mrs. Roberts went ahead and chopped off part of the backyard, as you can see, and then she built a duplex next door where she lived in the back until the mid-90s. And so they lived there. Well, I guess she lived there until the early 60s, and then different families. So at the turn of the century, 20th century, 21st century, that is, but 2004 to be exact, a architect and his family bought the house, and that architect is me. And so our firm is one which we focus primarily on residential, and we really believe that there is not, we don't have a preset aesthetic. We find that there's good and bad examples of anything, and when is it appropriate. We love doing projects where they're historic houses and adding and changing, sometimes more contrast, other times more in keeping with the original. In this series of images, two of the homes are new, the two on the bottom right, and then the one to its left. And then others are older houses where we made a lot of changes and contrasted. But again, underneath it all, it's not one, we don't approach it where let's start with a certain style, but really let's let it be more about the client, the land. Moving through houses, kind of the choreography is something I use that phrase quite a bit. How do you move through a home? Almost as if you're thinking about it in cinematic terms. The experience is texture versus smooth and more textured and so forth, light and dark. Earlier, there was an architect this morning who talked about having smaller cozy spaces and more wide open spaces. When we look at it, really, there's kind of three main elements of collaboration. There's what we bring to the table, of course. There's what the client wants, their programmatic functional needs, but also kind of their personalities, obviously very important. And then the land, I can't just kind of stress how important it is to let the site have a voice. We kind of look at it as if the site is just as active a participant in the design decisions. Here you see on the top, this is a ranch house that we did a few years back, and it's low and long, separate buildings connected by a big covered porch. But really trying to have it embrace the land, and the openness is something which we find is appropriate. By contrast, there's another house on the lower left. It's a more urban lot, narrow, very long and deep property. And so in that case, it's a more compact house, more urban in a sense, two-story and so forth. And so again, I look at it, there's not a prescribed aesthetic solution to any problem. It's more about listening, learning to listen to the client, listening to the cues of the land, and then that kind of intangible, hard to define. I guess it could be the Scandinavian word, but really the spirit of the place is something that is just so important. And it doesn't necessarily only have to be of the breezes and the sun and the shading, but also the spirit of kind of the cultural memory of a place. I think is maybe the best way I would describe it is, what relates. Real briefly, the house on the lower right was one with a beautiful, beautiful view. And so we wanted to open it up visually, of course, but not only that, we wanted it to be where you can inhabit and actually be in the space where you feel like you're part of the outdoors, not just looking at it. And it's a lake house. And so but it's a primary residence, but it's on the lake. And we really wanted it to kind of feel like a lake house. So the wood ceiling, the screen porch and so forth are things which almost have that kind of cultural memory of what a lake house should feel like. And that's really important to us, is trying to get the soul and the spirit of a place. So bring it back to our house, my house, the Windsor Road project. So we bought the house about 16 years ago. Have two boys, and as they got older, it's a 2-bedroom, 1-bath house, which I can kind of look at as when you have 2 bedrooms and 1 bathroom and 4 people, it's a great bonding experience for sure. But after a while, the boys grow up, they get bigger, they're teenagers now, but really the need kind of changes. And so the primary focus functionally in this renovation was for their bedrooms, our master bathroom, and then also a outdoor covered space. For all, the big yard that we have in the front, we really never had an outdoor covered area, which is really important to us. So those are the goals. And we talked a bit about the house and its character and its history and so forth. But so then the solution, we look at it, and we'll refer to this a little bit later, but the whole notion of reduce, reuse, recycle is one that's real important to us. We like the house. We like kind of this 1-story simple, aspect. So we didn't really want to tear it off. We didn't want to tear the garage down. And so not being garage people, you can see the lower left picture where the garage is. But we never wanted to tear it down. We wanted more about to reduce, reuse, recycle, as they say. Just some of the mid-process pictures, kind of showing again, you can see with the wood framing, the new and the old, and the character. So, I have one of my least favorite phrases in architecture that people always mention: form follows function. And, I guess it can, and in some ways does, but I think that there's a lot of really, really good ways of solving functional problems very successfully, where it can look very different. You can have certain aesthetic, formal solutions that can still be very equally as successful functionally. So for lack of a better way of describing it, we use these phrases: the new and the new old. And so by that I mean, here's an example of it. You can see where our garage doors used to be, and then an existing window opening was to the left. Then on the right-hand side, you can kind of see where we put in, rather than making a statement, at one point we thought we would have a big glass sliding door kind of contraption where the garage doors used to be. And for a few reasons, one being it faced west, a little northwest. You get a lot of afternoon sun there. But really, we wanted just to kind of make it look as though this part of the home was always that way. So the two new windows we added were really meant just to match the existing window. And so I guess you could say this is an example of the new old. The cupola we developed is an element that was inspired by the birdhouse, bring light into an interior feature into the loft. So then by contrasting that with the previous slide, this is one which I guess I can call the new. And again, this is more an example of purposefully contrasting. We are inspired. There's some of the decorative elements of the doors and the tile floors, and the color was meant to be evocative of perhaps, the 1930s, but it's purposely meant to contrast, with what was old, and kind of playing off, kind of riffing off of some of the motifs that were there. And the floor, just a quick shout out, Clay Imports provided the floor there. So everyone knows what this means: reduce, reuse, recycle. And in thinking of it, the reduce part is we did add bedrooms, but we didn't add to the house. And so we're kind of keeping it a relatively modest, size home. Reuse, obviously reusing the old garage structure rather than tearing it down and putting it into a landfill. And then the recycle portion, there's a number of elements, some windows and some material that was reused from elsewhere. And here is my son Calder, proudly standing in front of his travertine wall in his bedroom. And also in front, I will add, there's a few things that he made. He made those longboard, skateboard, and even like a guitar. So if you ever have an 8th grade class at Keeling Middle School, and have a project of what to make, you can be very ambitious and make an electric guitar. But anyway, we really like the story of how that wall, and he'll tell you more about it in the upcoming video, but having that travertine, it has a long history, and now it has a new home in his bedroom. So speaking of home and everything, so don't try this at home. This is kind of a way of describing being your own architect. Without going into too much depth, I think that it is that painting actually maybe describes it, right? So it's something which is, a lot of folks have said, oh, that's great, you get to do your own house now, your own project, you do anything you want. And for me, it's like in the middle of the night, like anything, and it just gets a little bit too, the burden of having infinite number of choices sometimes can be a challenge, but really it is a challenge, but I look at it as an opportunity, and I look at it as something where it's a laboratory, really. We approach this project as one where it's a series of different moments, trying different things, most of which we're happy with, but whenever we were trying to decide whether we should kind of do A or B, A being a bit more cautious, or B being a little more, trying new things that we hadn't done, we went with B. To really look at it, it's almost a responsibility in a way of pushing yourself and kind of expanding what you do, and then learning from past projects, but hopefully carrying it on to to future work, to future projects and designs, and seeing kind of what works, what doesn't, what you want to fine tune. Again, that balance between invention and precedent and so forth, I find so fascinating, where you kind of combine the new and the old, and hopefully for people in the future, who knows, this house will have its own next layers of history. So coming up next will be a video, kind of a walkthrough, and we'll give more examples and elaborate on some of the things that I've just talked about, and then followed by the question and answer. No, thanks for coming by and seeing the house.
It's so nice to meet you.
Yeah, we've enjoyed sharing more about our pointers. What we, again, it's all about the layers of history that we lived here. But really curious to get some feedback.
Yeah, it's been really interesting just following, the history of the house and see how you've added on the layers of stories to this house. I'm really excited to go inside and talk about that, and also where you put in new elements and where you sort of work.
Oh, the phrase we came up with, the new and the new old. And, well, happy to show you more. Come on in.
I love it. You've got modern art mixed with this old, warm, rich wood that clearly looks like it's original to the house. Can you tell us more about that?
Right. Well, this is, of course, the library room, and it's one of my favorite rooms in the house. And in the scheme of how much we changed or how much we kept the same, this room is really the one where we probably did the least, with a couple of exceptions. So it's a room that I really like. It feels like a classic library.
Yes.
Kind of like in the game of Clue, you have the conservatory, you have the parlor, the library, and so forth. So for me, this room is, when I envision like a classic room, a classic library, it's kind of like if you were kind of close your eyes and think, imagine a library. This is kind of what I would think of, the wood paneling, symmetrical, and so forth. There's very little change, but as the blueprint just showed, there used to be a desk right here. Originally, there was a desk that was built out. And we had a need for it. And in all honesty, the desk really was kind of bulky, and it wasn't as interesting as they finally crafted some furniture. But we didn't need it, and so we can change it again. If you can see the doors right here, these doors are meant to look like they were always there. The carpenter did a great job on the old long leaf pine and finding the same, reveal and so forth. And so this is a really good example. More almost like a restoration. We intended it to look like it was always there, even though it wasn't.
Mm-hmm. There are stories in this room.
There's every room has a story for sure. But one of the ones I find really interesting, though, the same carpenter who had rebuilt the doors, kind of strip off the paint, because as I mentioned, this room was originally wood, of course. But then the second owner in the early 60s painted it, which was just the style of the day. Mm-hmm. And what we learned, though, is as they stripped off the paint and began to stain it, we found these little dark splotches, one here and one a bit more pronounced than that window there. Pretty faint. But I remember thinking that they made a mistake, or somehow they could get too much stain at one spot. It was a little confusing. But then I remember looking at the drawings and seeing how Mr. Page had said one wall is for hunting trophies and one wall is for fishing trophies, and it was in the blueprints right under the elevations. And so it was really intriguing just to kind of know that they designed it to that extent, to that detail.
Specifically.
Right. But also the funny thing is the note saying that the wall for the fishing trophies, the wall for the hunting trophies, but then the note underneath it says not to exceed as the size is cut by Mr. Page. And so for me, that really tells the story of not just the person who lived here, not just the architect, but also, their relationship. At least as much of a friendly, if they weren't best of friends, they were on that kind of demeanor. That really kind of makes Mr. Roberts and Mr. Page seem more like real people.
Characters.
Indeed.
Yeah. Wonderful. This is a great example of the old, and as we move through the spaces, we'll see some of the old, new, exciting stuff.
Okay. Well, show you the kitchen next. I think that if this room is meant to be the most recreated or restored like it was original, the kitchen is one where it's very obvious that there are a lot of changes. So you go to the next.
Great. So you can see we're in the kitchen, and this is such a great example of a eclectic mix of old and new. And everywhere I look, I'm trying to figure out, well, what was here before, what's new, and that interplay is very interesting.
Well, it's a very eclectic room. Compared to the library we were just in, which is obviously, more true to its original condition. This room was one that we changed both physically as well as kind of the aesthetics, I guess you could say, in terms of matching the modern, the open, the texture, the color. Before we moved in many years ago, we actually had put in the cabinets and changed a lot of the kitchen. The big window was really done, obviously, nice sort of light. Big monitor. We also look at it like the whole front yard and Windsor Road becomes a big movie screen. When we think about it, right? But behind the large window with curved corners, which is more of a 1930s aesthetic. The color also is something which I just love the color. But I think I like the color because it is, on one hand, you walk in and it's, oh, this is so modern. Other people will say, oh, this color reminds me of my grandmother's and Robin's egg blue, and something that it's nice because it can really be interpreted differently by certain people. And the combination of the long leaf pine floor and which actually used to be the sun floor, is covered up. But some things that we did change, for example, we used to order already here. There used to be a cabinet here, but we liked it as alcove. But then when we had on, this opening was not here. And in fact, if you look at the floor, the line of the wood floor where it ends is where the house used to end. Originally, this is the breakfast bay, and then in the 1960s, they changed things around and made it actually the entry door on here. And so, everything where I'm standing is new. It used to be when we walked in right here, you would see backpacks, dog food bowls, water, soccer balls, shade guards, and on. It's something that I'm sure everyone has experienced when you just walk into your house. And like most people, we don't use the front door. This is our main door, right? And so for us, what are our functional needs? Because it's not just the aesthetics, it's also kind of the function. Just like the Roberts had to change their house to kind of adapt to their needs. Every family does. So our main focus here was adding all this space. And so you can see the outline. And rather than having to put the work, I'm sure we could have found a long line of actually was there close enough. But we really like the notion of having to change. The other thing, when you walk in, rather than walking in onto a wood floor and having to put, the mat and getting where there wood and having the dogs maybe still water and all those things, we really like having the tiles. So it's a both and situation. You have the ability to be decorative, you can talk about layers of history and all of that, but also it's a pragmatic solution. Having a hard durable surface when you walk into the house or something. When we look at some of our homes we designed, the kitchen is very open to family room. You can be in the kitchen and you can see the living room, you can see the TV, the fireplace all in one big space. We wanted to kind of keep true to the character of the house. It's not only the aesthetic character, right? But it's also the sense of, again, there's a need for, right? But you have these rooms. When you're in a room, it's a very distinct feel. This is the kitchen. The dining room is separate, and so on and so forth. And so, at the same time, we really wanted it to be a space where you can be social. Like a lot of families who spend the majority of time in the kitchen, and people congregate here. So having this room and opening it up from what used to be one small door out of a smaller clutter space, we created this drop-off area over here. But the other thing that we did was really to literally open up the kitchen so we go out to a porch.
And the transition in the floor is it's great. It just reinforces the idea that you added on.
Right, and because I think which is a literal also that, you can say you're putting it in the old.
Exactly. breezeways connecting these two structures. So you call the breezeway?
This is a breezeway. The driveway used to originally go through here, all around a big horseshoe-shaped driveway. But before a breezeway is really a dog trot, and the dog trot is a very traditional Texas type of arrangement where you have two halves of a house underneath one roof. And what's great about this particular dog trot breezeway is that it's a really well-known version. And by that I mean the opening faces southeast. We're on a hilltop, and the prevailing winds in Texas come from the southeast. And the other rule of thumb, we call thermodynamics, that as breezes go through, if the windward side of the breeze is coming in, it's smaller than where it's leaving. It helps to kind of pull the air through, which is one way of saying that it's a great space, but also it's really even better that we have the breeze coming through it. It's been a space where we spent a lot of time, especially over the past half of the year, being outdoors. And it's one of the elements that the house, as nice as the house was when it was first built, it really didn't have any big outdoor space. I think that was something that, of course, way back in the 19th century, these homes, these classical big southern porches, ceiling fans, so forth, people really lived outside. But by the time this house was built in the 30s, the trend was away from that. It has a nice front porch, but it's not big enough to really entertain or to eat outdoors. And in fact, we probably had 5 meals inside, since the last March, and this table, this outdoor station, we really love using it. We're fortunate. And in many ways, we talk about the kitchen and the flow between the kitchen and the space. We chose to keep the kitchen its own separate room. We didn't want it to be the family room, but really thinking about it, it's as if this really is our family room right here, and wanted to connect the two spaces. There's so many things, the blue that's on the steel here, the countertop, this is the kitchen. So we really wanted to make it feel like it's an extension of the kitchen. And one way of doing that, the color, material, the size of the opening of the big doors, certainly. And so lots of flow. For example, the tile floor we see here is the same tile that we had in the kitchen extension.
So tell me about the tile selection.
Well, this is a tile which such a terrazzo tile and comes from Turkey. But what's interesting is that it is very customizable. There's a catalog with all black and white line drawings, and then you get infinite. You probably have like 50 colors, and you have all different combinations, and it'd be enough to really take a challenge. So what the second process is that my wife looked at the catalog and I gave her some post-it notes and said, pick, your 5 favorite or 10, whatever, pick one you like, and then I'll look through it. And there's overlap. And so right away we knew we both liked it. And so for me, it's really an garden kind of element. It looks like it could be new or it could be from the 1920s or 30s. Very decorative, floral, the greenery and so forth.
Pattern and folks being outside.
Right. And I think that for me, it's also a good example of working with a family. When you have some people say, it's, you can do anything you want when you're your own architect, but it's not that I'm an architect. I'm still out there for my family, and so it's always very dynamic to work with family. But you can say it's a challenge in some ways, but I look at it as an opportunity. Yeah. And really, when you know and love people, you really get a sense of what to do. So, speaking of with family, this is my son Calder.
Yeah, hello. Well, for me, it's great to have an architect as a dad because, for me, in my room, I spend most of my time in, it's mine. He really, I guess, what designed it to be my space, and so it's really a reflection of me, and so just be with it now.
Sure. So, either way, Calder.
Yeah. I love Iron for a lot of reasons. One of my favorite aspects of it is this wall. This is travertine, actually from the same quarry as the stone for the Colosseum came from. And you know, it's so clean and smooth, but also it sort of has so much character, which I really love. And then over here, there's this wall as well. This is original before any renovations, and it was a 60-story garage. And so, again, you know, there's lots of character, and I've used it to put all the things that I've collected over the years. And so, you know.
I love that you've got air reflections here, and it's contrasted with this really smooth travertine. Question: where's the installation?
Well, good question. The installation is on the exterior, so it is a way of preserving the different remnants that you get the traces of history of the interior. And again, it's not like a character keep going back to that gave you a clue, right? When you think of like the contestant garage, I still think of like old wood frame exposed studs. And what's interesting is I've never seen anywhere else where they framed it with horizontals and grid. And to look at that, it really just looks cool, you know? And wanted to keep the spirit. And then we knew this was Calder's bedroom. We thought, oh, this is great because he loves collecting little, you know, things, different things. And it really, again, I saw it as an opportunity to go ahead and have this wall be part of the end result. We thought it looked nice, and again, sort of back to a function. It's a function for display and whatnot. And so, again, that prompted the decision to reapply to the exterior. One of the nice results also is when you look to, we applied the exterior with 2-inch foam all around, and then we rebuilt the board mat siding is what you see. And so it's for a thicker wall, almost like you're putting on a down jacket and then putting on an extra layer of windbreaker, I suppose. But it gives a deeper recess. The more you make the walls thick, then you have the window before you get recess, which helps protect them and so forth. So it was one of these things that it was driven initially by the desire to keep these remnants, these vestiges of the old house and character, and then let these things inspire all the different selections of having it really eclectic room.
This is a great kid room. But I'm missing the bed. Where's the bed?
It's out here. Yeah, so this is the loft that I sleep in. There's a cupola on top that, you know, brings in tons of natural light, which I really love. And I spend most of my time up here. It's a great place to hang out. Get really comfortable, so it's a great room.
Thanks for showing us your room, Calder.
Yeah, no problem.
It's been really great to see the house and your design approach. And I knew that you mentioned earlier about how you have to think about the house, but also the site at large. And so can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. So I guess, you know, you have each room. This house is a series of rooms of experiences, it's a collage of different things. But that's the interior. And even the space, which is the porch, is outside, but it's still part of the house, the architecture. And I'm a real believer, though, that it doesn't just stop. Architecture doesn't stop at the end of the house. Architecture is about the overall site and what it looks like and what happens there, the activities, and the other spaces. I think we'll understand. I can show you.
Let's see. So tell me about this space.
Well, this area here, this is a space, because it is a space. You see through the driveway, you can see the driveway is still here, and then it went through where the breezeway is. And it's really one of my favorite outdoor areas of the house. We've got a really small backyard right next to another house, and so forth, and a big front yard, but it's on a busy street. So for me, this area here was just one where we used to always hang around with. Even when this is a driveway, in fact, we would have campfires here. At some point, we thought to be having a fire pit or a fireplace. But we like to think about having it's just a primal aspect of just putting wood and logs on the ground if you're out camping. And so as we developed this, many of our neighbors couldn't just keep it a driveway and just put the logs on the ground. But we wanted to make it where it's just very clean, very open. And again, it's a real nice big scale is one thing we really love about it. And it's just like the breezeway in its way is an in-between space between the boys' wing and the rest of the house. This is also kind of an in-between space between the house itself. And then right behind me is the workshop. And in fact, the workshop was something which was kind of the missing link in a lot of the solution here. We never really parked our cars in the garage, but we had a lot of other things that we stored and just kind of a workspace and so forth. So we wanted to make it into the boys' bedroom. It's the perfect size for the boys' bedrooms.
Sure, if it's speaker's not working. What does that mean? Let's try switching it to the.
Sorry for those technical difficulties, everyone. I believe the team is getting set up and we'll continue the presentation in just a moment.
Hi guys. Hopefully you can hear me. We're about to switch over. We apologize for all the things are working great this morning, but they're not. We're going to switch over.
Okay, well, I think that I'm live now, but I have a link. Apparently, Zoom and YouTube, and there's some kind of conflict between the two. Yes, also, you don't have to have a client there. So, get to kind of shift gears a little bit. And one of the chefs usually filming us now. So, one of the video we had talked between the new and the old. Jen's going to show a bit of the kitchen while I stand here. Okay, so this is an example which we talked about in the earlier video, and if the audio is working better now, you can see where the old house used to end, and the tile floor is where everything was added. And so this is kind of, we could have brought in, of course, all the wood floor continuing, and so and on, but I guess any of these things we talked about as these features, we like to think of it as both and. It's not just one or the other. So in other words, this is a visual representation of the new and the old, and it's a decorative approach in a sense, but also it's very pragmatic when you walk in, having, the hard surface rather than wood floor and all that. And if you look on into here, this is our area, the dog food, bowls, everything else. Used to be without all here, we'd walk in and we kind of trip over kitchen water and everything else. This room is kind of contrasting to the library where we restored things without changing a whole lot, is that it's much more contrasting to elements. I think it's true for most families. The kitchen becomes a place where they spend all their time. And when we got the house, a lot of people made an assumption that we would be tearing out this wall over here and opening it up to the family room. I think that things go in cycles, and a lot of older houses from the 50s or 60s, the kitchens were very small and separate and closed off. And even though they ended up being fully crowded with people who were at a party, they didn't work. And so I think in a certain way, there's a reaction that's potentially an overreaction to having things too big and too open. And so this house is really all about kind of a series of rooms. And you could say, with a capital R, a room where it is, the library is a professional library, the wood paneling and so forth. And you got a sunroom, which feels like, lots of windows, of course. But we wanted it to be a kitchen where it's the kitchen. It's not a kitchen that opens up to the dining table or a kitchen opening up to the couch in the family room. But we did want it, though, to be very open, and a social space. And so what we did is they have these big doors. And so this is a way where we kind of flow. And in a sense, really the breezeway and the patio becomes our family room. And I've been real happy over the last few months, especially, with being outdoors. So this is the breezeway. And again, another video, some of it, but this is where the driveway used to go through. And we really like that separation between the two pieces. It's an example also of a Texas dog trot. And a dog trot is the term that is used for, when you have two different living spaces underneath one contiguous roof. And this is actually a really good version of the dog trot and the breezeway, because the opening over here faces southeast. And big oak trees kind of funnel the breeze through. And then there's a couple of rules about, how flow of air works. And if you are on a hilltop facing the prevailing breezes, and the opening where the wind is coming from is smaller than the opening where it's leaving, it really helps to draw the air through. So there's a lot of days where it isn't all that windy, but we can be standing out here or sitting at the table, and you really do get to have a nice breeze. The other, so I'll show you on into what used to be the garage wing. And so in the video I think you were watching, you saw Calder. And we will be sending out a link, everyone, so you can see the YouTube video with great clarity. But this is his bedroom. And having some fun with kind of invention of hidden doors and so forth. Then in the previous more slideshow, you saw the travertine. And this is the wall which we really like. And so and one thing I think is really interesting about it is that it's just exposed studs, but it has a horizontal, which I've never seen before. And so you get this really cool grid of squares. And so keeping it was driven by a few things. One was just that kind of nostalgia for the remnant of the old garage, the old school kind of wooden simple garage building. And knowing that this was my son's room, he loves collecting things. And so some built-in cabinets. Like here, we thought this would be a kind of great spot. So it's part nostalgia, but then also the function of display. That was really interesting. And how to contrast the travertine wall being very kind of precise and all that, but kind of the rustic quality here. It doesn't have any insulation within the studs. And so what we did is we put foam insulation on the outside, so the entire house is wrapped with a 2-inch thick rigid foam insulation, which we then kind of rebuilt and we didn't restore, but we recreated the wall that used to be there, the board and batten, and just built a new. But it's like, for describing, like you're putting on a down jacket on the outside, but in this case to keep the house cool primarily. A nice kind of peripheral benefit of that is that when you put the insulation on the outside is that you have the recess. So the windows are more recessed in, which looks nice. Gives a little bit of depth or shadow, but also helps protect them, in terms of a little extra, from the weather. And so I really like how we did that. The frame along the window over here is one which is something which was, I like to kind of look at some of the historical, traditional vernacular elements and just kind of overscale them in a way that is, not trying to make them any more complicated, but just, again, that extra scale I find is a very interesting, element in architecture, is to take something very, very common, very simple. We purposely chose this double sash, the double hung window, just because they are so generic, rather than making it, divided light or doing anything too, overtly a feature. So just keeping kind of the classic, almost anonymous look. This is my son's bedroom, and in the video you would see him poking his head up through there. But this is the cupola. You remember in the old Page Architects drawing, it was a birdhouse originally, which is a cool little feature, but it had long since been a home to actual birds. And so that's where he sleeps up there. And again, kind of playing off of the vernacular, the border band on the outside is using these features. Just kind of having fun with something, and now and see the more. Actually, real quick, since we're doing live, just take advantage of the opportunity. It's a little more cluttered right now, but this is my other son's bedroom. He's out of town, but just the contrasting kind of aesthetic of the two. Also a shout out, thanks for the prompt, Jen. Artisan wood floors. This is a pre-finished, engineered wood floor, white oak. This is the one we talked about. In fact, this is an example of, it's a terrazzo tile. Clay Imports here in town is the distributor. It's from Turkey. And it's a great company. You get to the tile manufacturer. They have a pattern book, and you can go ahead and pick any pattern you want in all different colors. And on the computer, you get to kind of, mix and match and see what it's going to look like. So we wanted this porch to feel like it was something which is, obviously it's new, but again, the elements of having the texture of the ceiling, the classic kind of just white, but keeping it simple. Another example in this space, though, is that it originally, like as far as even when construction started, we were going to go ahead and put in a wood ceiling and cover up the joists. We really liked them and realized, hey, let's keep those. And it was something that we liked making that change during construction. So.
Do we want to do a little bit of Q&A?
We have one now that I can
Okay.
give to you. So we've got somebody who, Christy Seals, would like to know a little bit more about your design process, working with your family, kind of as your co-client, and how did this get built? Did you have final drawings? Was it more design build? I mean, how was the process
Good.
kind of organic?
Well, Christy, it's funny you mentioned that, because that's just the anecdote that I was in the middle of. And so used telepathy instead of audio communication. No, seriously, the ceiling is one example. I was just saying is initially we thought we just wanted a smooth wood ceiling, with a dime gap, joint. But when they framed it, and only after they framed it, I really liked kind of the texture, the character that the ceiling, had, and realized we could run the conduit for the light fixtures and so forth. In the roof decking above. And so that's an example of how we made changes during construction. And so for better or worse, compared to most of our other projects, this one had a very, very lean set of drawings and details. on these doors, for example, here's one example. When we picked out the hardware for the doors, we realized that we wanted the combination code, where you don't have to have a key. Since we're going back and forth between these two spaces, it'd be pretty cumbersome to have to use a key every time that you would go from a bedroom back to the house. And so we like this model. But then we realized the door we had designed, it was going to be fabricated, was too wide for this hardware. And so it's one of those challenges. We tried to find a different hardware to use. We like this one. And so we ended up having it be, cut it from the camera here, a situation where we had to make this thinner, right? And so it gave us, again, that opportunity as we look at the doors, we close them. It becomes kind of a feature, taking something which is a very classic kind of old side door to a house, but then just imagine that's being almost like some pop art to, very common objects and just increase the scale is how I look at it, right? And so here it's this little kind of break between these two, and how the glass goes all the way up to the top. Again, it's sort of taking a twist on kind of a very, very common domestic, vocabulary. But that bronze feature right there was one where we did it during construction. And we also took the advantage, you can kind of see down here, of imprinting it. I don't know if the camera can catch it or not. So we have it engraved very small. But, and then on the question of being, working with your family, it is something which is, it was good. There's a challenge, of course, because when it's your own house, you kind of think, well, you can do whatever you want, like in the earlier presentation. But in reality, your family is a client. And when you're working with people that you love and so well, there's a different dynamic indeed. And I think that it's something that I do want to kind of thank my family for their patience. But no, the tile floor, I was just starting to tell the story of when we had the catalog of all just the line drawings and what you can do. It is something that my wife looked at it, and I said, just look at it on your own, found what I like. And there's one overlapping pattern where that as an architect sometimes, when it's your world and you do that every day, you kind of have to really listen. You're listening to other people and their voice.
I think we have one more. Just want to talk a little bit, but just want to talk about where it came from originally.
Oh, originally the travertine was from Tivoli, Italy. The same quarry that the ancient Colosseum stone apparently is from. And we actually do have extra. So message me.
We're getting close to the end of our sponsors. Arson Floors has been a big one for us. But yeah, Hugh, if you want to send us off, I think we're wrapping up.
Okay. Well, I want to thank everyone, and apologies for the video. We will be sending out a link, or Ingrid or AIA will be sending out a link so you can watch the full video if you want. And part of that video, if you don't get to see it, is recognizing the great team. When it's my house, it's my family's house, but it also there's 7 people in practice, and we're very, very fortunate to have a great group of people who have been with us, 6 years, 7 years, and a few that are more, just last year or two. But it really it takes a whole team, and if you get to watch the video, you get to see our pet pig Flintstone and their goats too. So again, thank you all, and our apologies for the technical difficulties, but hopefully we're able to show you a bit about my house. And if you ever want to come by, just shoot an email. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you all.